Very good. All right, well-known couple by now. I don't think anybody would have recognized them normally on the streets of Germany somewhere. But as I said, these are the last time. These are the two who came up with the Pfizer vaccine. As a pretty neat Cinderella story, so I'll touch a little bit more on that. But really, the interesting part is they made the design of the vaccine within a day, actually within a few hours. It's kind of a Cinderella story, as I mentioned last time. They developed 20 candidates over the weekend once they realized they're sitting on a technology which they used to develop for cancer. Interesting thing, neither Moderna nor Pfizer ever developed the vaccine. Moderna was a little bit more set up for that. And in case of BioNTech here, the final candidate took them 3 to 4 hours to develop on a weekend day, pretty much. Not pretty much. And that was actually an interesting story coming from Germany, a couple more insights of it. When Dr. Sahin here realized that he's sitting on the solution for a vaccine, he then ordered his staff to go and drop everything. And at that time, BioNTech had about 1,000 people. Now they have about 1,800 or getting close to 2,000. And then he said, I was surprised why nothing else was going on. I ordered them to have no vacations anymore, to work on the weekend. We split the teams up in 2 or 3 shifts in case one shift got infected and kind of falls out. So we tried to keep things running in parallel. And the biggest problem was to get them back to work, because it was on the weekend where there was Mardi Gras in Germany. And Mainz is kind of the epicenter of the carnival. And he said, it's kind of weird. I didn't see the activity next day. I thought I need to see. So I called all my staff back in on the weekend, and they said, well, what about this drop everything demand of mine? Did you not understand? And, some of them are trying to get sober. Some of them were kind of caught by surprise as well. And they said, well, you mean everything? He said, yeah, everything. So let's get started here. So you can see here the vaccine efficiency is, this is the Pfizer one, just to repeat again. Right here, these are the cases in the vaccine group. These are the cases who got COVID or symptomatic COVID in the placebo group. And there's quite a dramatic difference. One of the highest ones we've ever seen is 95% efficient as a vaccine. Normally, vaccines are in the 60, 70% range, which is considered excellent. However, this is in the 95% range, which is just phenomenal. You can see here just split up a little bit among different age groups. They obviously gender matched, different races. And I show you this just to show you the comparison to the Moderna vaccine now, which is, this is the Pfizer here in this case. So this is the primary outcome of Moderna, pretty much the same numbers. They have a 94% efficacy. You see different subgroups here, the efficacy numbers, age matched, and this is really important. In the group above 65 years old, they have an 86% efficacy rate. Now, this sounds like it drops off a lot, but keep in mind, if this number is up or down by 1, the numbers are so low because they have to wait until people get infected naturally. That changes by easily 10%. So this is still very, very high. Then you look at different age groups, like I said, whether people are at risk for severe COVID, they match them in different sex, different specifically ethnic groups. That's what was very important for the FDA. They had about 3,500 people in there from, actually here in this case, 5,000 community of colors. And you can see that was actually a little bit higher in terms of the efficacy they were able to measure. Same with the Asian population. So, I mean, this is outstanding to have anything above 90% in a vaccine trial like this. Then one of the important portions here is when you look at the numbers and see when the groups are separating, you can see here, this is after 10 days actually, is when you start to have your full protection after the first shot. Oops. And this is important to realize because that has implications, and which is going on now as a discussion whether you can spread the second shot out. These are the number of days, and they really nicely point out that after 10 days, you have your full protection. Now, some of them have not necessarily reported that. So I have here, for example, a headline from the British Medical Journal, who did a review on this one, on the Pfizer vaccine. And they report 52% after the first dose and 95% after the second dose. That's the headline. But that is not really the case. Where they got this from is after, the way it was reported in a standardized way. They look at it, and this is a table directly out of the New England Journal publication here, that there's a 52% efficacy. Where's this 52% coming from? The 52% is coming from, if you look at the time frame between 0 and 21 days. The first 10 days you have nothing, 0% protection. Then you start suddenly on day 10, have 95%, and that calculates all together over the 3-week period down to 52%. But who cares? That's really not the point. The point is, after 10 days, you go from 0 to 95%, and the curve very much flattens out. So the 52% is very misleading. You have 0 in the first days, but then you suddenly, it kicks in, and from that moment on, you have 95% protection. I mention that because Moderna is kind of in the same way. They just don't seem to have a lot of experience with, because they never had any kind of drug approved, and obviously Pfizer is very different. This is where suddenly they, in their reporting and the way they have the graphs and the way they collected the data, they were really focusing on a 14-day period. The FDA actually had to ask them, going back to their submission, say, so when do your curves separate? And they didn't really, they looked at them and pretty much said, why do you want to know? Well, it's important. So they had to take them a little bit more by the hand. And indeed, it's not coming out of that graph, but in their reply, they say, well, after 14 days, they separate, and they pretty much have the same protection from that moment on. So after both of them, after the first shot, Pfizer after 10 days, Moderna after 14 days, gives you the full protection with the vaccine here. So whoever got it so far, 10 to 14 days later, you're pretty much set. And you can see here in the little bit more detailed data, the way Moderna is calculating it or counting it is they looked at the first 14 days after the first dose, and they already can see then a nice separation. And then from 14 days on, you pretty much have 95% effectiveness. And they kind of show you the numbers here. So then it goes down really in the vaccinated group between 14 days before the second dose and 14 days after the second dose. It goes down to 0, and then it kind of, the curve is completely flattened out, similar, exactly the same as Pfizer has. So it's pretty amazing how comparable they are. And this is all now coming either from the submitted data we have in the data set to the FDA, or this was then published in the New England Journal. Obviously, quite a significant publication here with them and for them. So the two vaccines are a little bit different. They're based on the same kind of technology, mRNA for the spike protein. But the Moderna one, they selected that you get the second shot after 28 days, not after, after 28 days, not after 21 like the Pfizer is. Another important data point for both vaccines was, well, if you indeed have actually COVID after you get the vaccine, do you at least have not as severe of a COVID? So here's a comparison. They had the people who got severe COVID in the group in the Pfizer vaccine, only one of them had actually the vaccine, 9 of them were in the placebo group. It was quite strikingly differently the way it worked out for Moderna. 30 people who had severe COVID in the entire trial of 30,000 people, they were all in the placebo group. And there was nobody with very severe disease in the vaccinated group here. So in case you do get, none of the severe cases were actually in the vaccine group. Why is that important? Well, we have a lot of discussions now, and other countries are extremely desperate here to come up with some solutions. So for example, and I've never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, that a regulator or a country is saying, we're not care so much what the science says and the way we run the trial and based on the data we have, but we're gonna say, why don't we just delay the second dose if we have that great of a protection going on here? And then everybody said, well, maybe that's a good idea. We're in a crisis, but are we sure we can do this? And at least our FDA said, well, we're not really in favor of that. We need both doses of the vaccine, and we need it in the way the trials were designed. And there's really not a good reason between like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or maybe even 6 weeks. It was just the way it was selected. And then people run with it and did the trial, and they have evidence, obviously all the data for those time points. But people are desperate. The idea is, can we skip the second dose or stretch it out so we can essentially vaccinate twice as many people? And the UK is actually going for that. UK is different because they went outside. They're not in the EU anymore. They're not having the same regulator like the rest of the continent in Europe. So they operate now independently, and that's when they made the decision. But obviously there's a striking crisis going on over there in the UK. And that's why they have relatively drastic measures that way. The interesting part is, where's really the first protection coming from? Because if you are now looking at neutralizing antibodies, you don't have antibodies in any of the vaccine doses. This is again the Pfizer one, 10, 20, or 30 micrograms, and the placebo. Just watch out here. This is actually a log scale. And you can see here at any dose, 20, 30 micrograms, you have very little protection in terms of antibodies. You don't have almost any antibodies. It really goes up after the booster shot. This is now after 28 days, and the log scale goes up, and it goes from like, a value of 12 to like 1,500 in terms of your neutralizing antibody titer. And then goes up to 2,000 and is pretty much high there and remains pretty high. Oops. So that's important to understand. So this is not antibodies which give you the protection. It is really your cellular immunity. These are the killer cells, which give you the early protection against the virus. The long-term protection in terms of antibodies kicks in at a later stage with a second dose. But again, you don't need it necessarily, but also we don't know how long is the cellular immunity by the killer cells gonna last. and when do we actually need this very last shot. That was just simply never studied, and that's why our FDA is relatively skeptical there. I showed this slide before the last time. I just want to emphasize that here they measure actually CD4 and CD8 cells, specifically the CD4 T cells. These are Th1 cells they're interested in. And this is when they compare the effect of the vaccine at producing the T cells in comparison to what people go through when they have COVID. And this is actually convalescent plasma here. And the cell numbers you get through it. You get significantly higher cellular protection with a vaccine than you get if you would have the actual COVID infection. That's important to understand, that the vaccine protects you so much better on the cellular level. Now, this is some Moderna data. Oh, crap here. And they looked at a lesser dose of 25 micrograms and 100 micrograms, and they measured different cellular immune markers here in terms of the T cell response, and then different interferons and interleukin levels and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These are all cellular numbers they're looking for. And you can nicely see they get a nice response here. But what they measure here is not the very strongest after 29 days after the first shot, but it apparently is enough to give you very good protection. They get a much higher number after the higher dose. That's why they went with a higher dose. Specifically, they were looking at the population where, you know, you're above 55 years and here above 71 years. They were really trying to seek a very high cellular immunity relatively early on. That's why they went with the 100 microgram dose. It is significantly higher responsiveness compared to the lower dose in the elderly population. And these are, of course, the ones where what they're really trying to target here. Now, again, we're in a moment of crisis. The question then becomes, well, if we can't stretch out the dose, can we actually consider giving people half the dose so we can give it to twice as many people? And actually, as crazy as it sounds, the FDA is actually considering it with Moderna because they didn't see a very big difference in their immune response in the younger people under 55. Just to walk you through the data here a little bit, why they're actually considering something absolutely crazy like this. Why would you change the dose where you have quote unquote approval for? Would be an extremely unusual moment. So this is now looking at the specific IgG. This is at the humoral response. And just to walk you through the data here, and I use it as an example so you see what the different doses actually do here and why they went with certain doses. So this is Moderna. This is a placebo where they measure the amount of IgG. And again, this is a log scale. And here they have the numbers on there, the actual numbers, so you can see them. This is on day one. There's almost nothing there in the younger age group in all the different doses. Again, this is a Pfizer one. And you can see here after 3 weeks, you suddenly have a relatively nice response here in the lower dose, goes up to 600, but then goes up to about 6,000 after you get your booster shot after 3 weeks. Now, in the next highest dose, you kind of double that. And this is in people of, you know, younger people in the younger group. And you can see it goes up to about 12,000. And in the elderly, it only goes up to about 3,000. So you get a significantly lesser antibody titer in people who are older. And this is normal. This is you know, the immune system simply is not as reactive anymore in elderly. And you get the maximum amount with 30 micrograms. But the point is, you need it for the elderly population over 65. You want to have in that higher range. It gives you much better protection in those antibody titers. The lower doses, they are significantly less. So what they're actually considering is splitting the doses in half for people who are 55 years or younger, because there they found that you already have the full protection or the full desirable dose, which you need. In the elder, you don't, so they need the higher dosage here. The point is, it's exactly the same for Moderna, and I'll show you that in a second. This is, again, the comparison for people who already had COVID. So you can see the levels they get with having the disease compared to the levels of what the vaccine does to you. So it gives you about, at least by this matrix, about 10 times the amount of antibodies in comparison as if you would have actually naturally COVID. That's how great those very, very specific vaccines work. Moderna didn't present it that nicely, and they have a little bit different metrics to measure it. But here you have the 100 microgram dose, which is now used in the larger phase 3 trials in younger people, 18 through 55. And here's half the dose. And you can see the titers or the measurements and the metrics here are pretty much the same. These are, again, for example, the geometric means for the neutralization assays, and they give you relatively similar numbers here in the lower versus the higher dose, and they think they can cut this in half for the younger population, but not the elderly. So that's actually what they're very heavily looking at, trying to get twice as many doses into the people. And this is extremely unusual for a regulator to even consider that. Something which you don't have much clinical data for, but essentially saying we can get this out to twice as many people because of it. Now,
Jens, can I ask a question?
Any.
Why? It would seem that the mRNA vaccines, both of them, are really, really similar. I don't really understand what's the difference between them. I'm sure there's some difference, the exact genetic material or something, but the volume, you know, the dose, you're talking about the Moderna at 100 micrograms, and the larger dose of the Pfizer is 30 micrograms. So,
correct.
I mean, is it just completely apples and oranges, or why are you talking about 3 times the actual dose of the stuff infused?
Quite honestly, nobody knows. The companies do know, and that's kind of a trade secret. It's the way they package the vaccine and they decode it for the unfolding of the spike. So the binding areas are essentially not covered up, but the spike unfolds and it can be read that way differently. As you see clinically, there is no difference. Also, in terms of, I agree with you, the mRNA, there shouldn't be a difference, but for some reason, BioNTech has a different way to display and deliver the vaccine, and that's what the dose is different for. Exactly, trust me, I was asking the same question, but I could not find any data, and at the end of the day, the companies are ultra secretive about it, and that's something they don't really tell you, how they came up with those doses and what it does. All I can tell you is that these were the dose ranges they started to study the vaccine. But good question. I was asking myself, and after I spent about 4 or 5 hours trying to find any answers to that, and I couldn't.
Okay.
Sorry. Now, you know, Pfizer at least came out with statements and said, well, guys, at least they told the UK guys, you know, do not stretch out the second dose because we worked so hard for this. We don't want you guys to ruin it. And then anybody to be maybe resistant or it's not going to work anymore or here and there. You know, there's an emotional discussion going on because the UK, they're in such desperation. Then Fauci chimed in. I would not be in favor. And, other people did, but then the UK kind of is sticking with it, and they are stretching out. They made the decision to stretch out the second dose just to get it out there quicker. That's how desperate they are. Safety, Moderna safety. You can see here, this is the participants. It's kind of weird, again, how Moderna displays the data a little bit. The first two columns here are placebo dose 1 and placebo shot dose 2. And then comes actually the active dose 1 and dose 2. So, obviously the main issue, the main local events are pain. Once the vaccine kicks in, it kind of gives you a pain, a sore arm, similar as to kind of any vaccine, but about 80% of the people kind of report that. And then everything else is kind of, yes, there is a signal there, but it's all part of you having an immune response locally in your arm. These are all local events. It might swell up a little bit, similar to a flu shot, really not less and not much more. It's a little bit more with safety with the systemic events. Again, these are all secondary. You might get a very low-grade fever. You might get a headache. You might get tired, specifically after the second shot. The first shot is very similar to placebo in terms of their occurrences. And then, you're going to feel some body aches, and you feel some joint pain, and you feel maybe some chills, etc. All very normal, all in relationship, and all similar to Pfizer coming around with a second shot here, when actually then your humoral system with your antibody production kicks in. Nothing in terms of severe events or, out of those mentioned here compared to placebo. So this is exactly the same. None of other events which can happen in a trial of 30 or 40,000 people, any different compared to the placebo group. So none of the other things you can think about it. People heard about ball palsy, etc., are exactly pretty much the same than placebo were, or are pretty much exactly the same like they would be in the normal population. Like a few people had heart attacks. Well, the amount of heart attacks were exactly the same in the placebo group compared to the active group. So none of that is drug related. So one of the big questions is a lot of what people were asking me, or which is out there, is that can you still be a carrier? And of course, let me assure you, you can inhale some virus and then you can exhale it again, and you can spread it around a little bit. And I seem to demote this here a little bit in terms of, because there was some interesting data. I showed you this graph before. This is from Pfizer, and they gave some monkeys some doses to inhale, and this is looking at their lung specimen, at their bronchoalveolar lavage, and what they inhaled in the nose, they put about 1 million viral particles in there. And you can see here, they looked then after 3 and 6 days, and they could not find anything in the lung. And this is the bluish here. None of the monkeys were actually positive in the vaccinated group. So the infection never spread to the lung. However, it did so in the placebo group. And then they kind of naturally got rid of the virus after a while. Here's the nasal data, and there they picked something up after day 1, but then it had cleared at day 3 in all the monkeys, and obviously stayed low, and there was nothing really here. And it makes a lot of sense because you inhale the virus cannot get into your cell anymore, it cannot multiply, and it clears up very quickly. It simply cannot survive by only colonizing your nose. And this is animal data. The interesting thing is, the Moderna, they did the same thing and pretty much found the same thing. Here you can see different doses of the vaccine at 10 micrograms and 100 micrograms. And this is actually the lung data where you see a lot of the monkeys being positive. So the virus spread to their lung after nasal inhalation. However, only one monkey was positive on day 2, and then on 4 day and 7, they were all negative. Now they used a couple more monkeys here. They used about 7 of them, 7 or 8 of them, no, actually they used 13. I'm sorry, 13 monkeys here in each group, and you can see it really clears up very quickly when they have it in the lung. The nose too, after 1 day, only 3 monkeys were positive, and then they became negative. They had 1 there which was positive after 4 days, but overall they cleared it out of their airways very quickly. In the vaccinated group, not so quick, and they had a significantly higher amount of virus in there in the non-vaccinated group. Now, everybody says, well, this is animal data, I get it, but really buried into some of the, this was like a supplemental submission after the fact to the FDA, and it's kind of buried there on page 36 or something like that. And there's a little table which shows you, interesting, the first human data. What they actually did is they looked at whether you have virus there at your second shot. And these were all asymptomatic patients, and actually about roughly 50 of them were actually, in the whole trial of 30,000, were actually COVID positive but had no symptoms at the second shot. Interestingly, about 3 times as many were in the placebo group versus the vaccinated group. So this actually is the first glimmer of light here to give you some human data. The humans could be carriers, but they were clearing it out of their airway much, much quicker. And also they had a significant lesser amount of virus there, although that was not meant to be a quantitative amount here. They just looked at the number of positive people. But there's about a 3-to-1 ratio of having a lesser chance to be caught positive, even if you're not symptomatic. So again, you're unable to multiply the virus in you. You might have some virus you just inhaled over the last 1 or 2 days in there, but that is getting cleared up in the placebo group, in the vaccinated group, extremely quickly. I found that very, very intriguing and interesting. So we're very unlikely to be as contagious after being vaccinated, after the first shot, than we would be without it, even if we don't have symptoms. Now, the world is going through quite some interesting scenarios here, and I just show the world has about 12 billion doses reserved of vaccines, but we have an interesting scenario here where all the vaccines which are coming out and where countries were hedging are not really coming through, because they're all based on vectors of viruses, virus DNA, and in another virus, a dead virus being injected, etc. So this shows you here pretty much the US, the EU, and COVAX is an initiative by the World Health Organization, where quote-unquote rich countries gave portion of the vaccine to poor countries just to make sure they have access to it as well. And this is pretty much the whole world contributing to the COVAX vaccine. And then the WHO is, with the money, buying them up on the global market and giving it to extremely poor countries like Haiti also, who wouldn't be able to vaccinate their population otherwise. And this is a standard procedure during a pandemic that is designed that way. But it's pretty much the US and the EU and India to a certain degree, which is buying up the entire world supply in vaccines. This number here, and I showed you a similar table before, this is updated a little bit. These are the leading candidates here. So this is AstraZeneca in combination with Oxford. This is Novavax. It's a German company coming through here to have a different kind of vaccination technology. This is Pfizer. This is Janssen, J&J, which is also a virus-based technology, which started phase 3 trials in the US in December. This is Sanofi, GlaxoSmithKline, and you can see the countries all have hedged. They didn't know which vaccine would coming through, so they ordered certain amounts from different companies and already part of it prepaid. This is the Russian vaccine called Sputnik. Kind of funny name that way, and this is Moderna. So Moderna and Pfizer are the only two who are now approved in the US. And the United States actually is down here. They increased their Pfizer dose from 100 million to 200 million, and their Moderna dose from 100 million to 200 million, since they both got approved. Moderna was relatively easy because they paid for the development. Pfizer was a little bit different story because they had sold the vast majority of their capability to the rest of the world during usually between August and October. At that time, nobody knew that these were the leading candidates, or these were the only ones coming through. This is AstraZeneca. The US has ordered fixed order for 500 million doses there. However, they have, as I mentioned last time, they really have issues with their trial, the way they had it designed. AstraZeneca is not very experienced in vaccine development. So there were a couple of blunders where they didn't have the dose right, or to part of the participants, they didn't gave only half dose, which then actually worked better. But they don't have any data in the elderly on that one, which is actually the main target population right now, which needs to be taken care of relatively quickly. So I show you that what the rest of the world is doing. They were all betting onto AstraZeneca, mainly because it was a given technology where you put some viral DNA into another virus and develop it. But right now, this is unlikely to get emergency approval in the US. It's not even on the table. So the only ones we have right now is Pfizer and is Moderna. And we procured about twice as many doses since December from both one of them. This caused some arm wrestling here with Pfizer because Pfizer had asked the US to execute their options, and the US did not in October. Starting in July, there was a long ongoing discussion, and then Pfizer sold it to other countries who were kind of desperate to come through. And now the US is actually invoking the Defense Production Act to help Pfizer get more ingredients for it, and is able to supply some more doses. I'll touch on that a little bit in a little bit. So right now we have about 400 million doses. We doubled the amount of doses. We have enough now for 200 million people, which is about 56% of our population of the two vaccines out there. But keep in mind that the vaccine is only approved right now down to 16 years in the Pfizer case and down to 18 years in the Moderna case. And a significant amount of our people are kids. Plus, they somewhat count a little bit on the fact that not everybody wants to get vaccinated. Why is beyond me, or why somebody would not, but that's certainly a case. So, a couple of headlines just to. This is actually a very hot topic right now. They secured more doses of Moderna. They also secured more doses of Pfizer. Moderna is actually the most expensive one on the open market. It sells between $25 and $37 per dose. Pfizer came through, is now supplying a little bit more. But the second 100 million doses of Pfizer, they have committed $70 million by the end of June this year, so within 6 months. And then the rest of $30 million no later than July 31st. So within the month of July, they come up with the rest of the additional 100 million doses here. just to show you what's going on, and a lot of people don't understand on how difficult it is normally to get this all right when you're dealing with a real virus. This is Sanofi GlaxoSmithKline. They actually announced what they call a delay. I would call it a failure because they looked at their preliminary data and they created an immune response in younger people below 50. And the response they had is only comparable to what patients with COVID would have. Remember when I said the immune markers here are about 10 times as high with Pfizer and Moderna, both in the cellular immunity and the humoral antibody immunity. Here, they only achieved immune response in the younger population, but they got about 1/10 of the immune response out of it, what Pfizer and Moderna have achieved with the mRNA technology. So they think they get the dose right, and they don't have any good response at all in the elderly. So they got to go back to the drawing board and kind of restart their phase 1, 2, and 3. And now they say, well, we probably are shooting for the fourth quarter this year to come up with the vaccine. It just shows you the enormous advantageous pathway and the different technologies. Once you deal with a virus, it's very difficult to get this all right and then run in a big trial with it. The mRNA is pretty much all you do is you dial it in. It's an amazing technology. I give you an example of another blunder. So Australia has become the first country to completely abandon the vaccine development. They were investing $750 million into their own vaccine. And the problem was that patients became HIV positive after getting the vaccine. They weren't HIV positive, they just tested HIV positive. So they had no idea on how to explain that and what else the vaccine was doing. And they completely scrapped the entire program. Now, the problem with things like that is that they now realize that the vaccine they were betting on ain't working and they got nothing. So they're now scrambling on the world market and they just bought and ordered 10 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And they start vaccinating in February, March. So Pfizer is obviously, and so is Moderna. Pfizer is way ahead of the curve. Every other government starts to order the Pfizer vaccine, which doesn't really help with supply around the world. And sometimes they were pretty vague in their contracts, and they made certain commitments, and they are keeping up with it so far. But you know, the problem is right now all the other vaccines are faltering, and only 2 are coming through to the full benefit and are so stellar in their performance. They also trying to strike a deal with AstraZeneca, but again, AstraZeneca, their data does not look as good. They only show a 60% efficacy in the full dose where they have all the data support for it. So the difference between, having 40% remaining where the vaccine doesn't really work versus 5% is actually quite a significant difference between vaccines here. So UK was so desperate, they didn't care. They actually approved AstraZeneca, which, by normal standards, you would say, okay, that's an average working vaccine, what they have here. But, right now, at least, quote unquote, the rich people, the US is very fortunate to have the finances to get their hand onto the Pfizer Moderna vaccine. And the same happens in Europe. They are pretty much looking at the Moderna and mRNA technology of Pfizer as well. So AstraZeneca is the hottest seller in the world market. because it's relatively cheap, and that's all what the rest of the world really has good access to. And the UK has their hands on some of the Pfizer vaccine, but they're not part of the European procurement anymore. And there's an absolute health crisis going on in the UK right now. And so that's why they need more, and they don't care how good the data and how good the vaccine is. They just approved AstraZeneca. This will not happen in the US. It will not happen in the European EU market, specifically not for emergency approval. So the Europeans already made the statement. Our own FDA made the statement. The data looks too weak so far. The data is not robust, and AstraZeneca is conducting currently a phase 3 trial in the US in order to, quote unquote, provide more data so they can convince the regulators. So in summary, pretty much all the conventional virus-based vaccines have issues. It's just very difficult to get this all right under an extreme time pressure. You don't have time to test out all the different doses, etc. Get this all straight. They're all faltering and have some issues, and then have to go back to the drawing board or redo a trial. The only ones which are absolutely stellar are the two with the mRNA technology, Pfizer and Moderna. They have both emergency approval from the FDA. The data was so convincing in terms of the benefit versus the risk or the side effects. And to the point that now Pfizer and Moderna have the issue that their placebo group is kind of revolting to say, well, what about us? We now got the placebo, and they, in an optimal world, are trying to follow up with them for the next 2 years. But for ethical reasons, they feel that they cannot deny the vaccine to the people who got the placebo and help them to get to this point. So Pfizer and BioNTech already made the decision to offer free vaccines to the participants who are in the placebo group, and they will unblind the trial, so they let everybody know what they got, and hope that some people will stay in. They will not get the free vaccine from them. And they will also follow up on the people who were initially vaccinated by them within the trial, who actually got it. But it's very difficult for ethical reasons now to justify to not give it to the people who helped you to get to this point and who volunteered in the trials. So the next one in line here for the US is probably Janssen. They might complete a trial in 2021 this year here in the US, probably within the next 8 weeks at the end of February. Then, of course, it takes some time, probably a month or so, to start analyzing some of the data, to put all the package together, to go for emergency approval, assuming that is all going well. And again, this is a virus-based vaccine. This is the only one which comes through as a single dose right now, which certainly would have certain advantages, but they have no results yet. A lot of people say, oh, no problem, we only have 400 million doses for 200 million people. Well, the other ones are coming through. No, they are all having issues. And that's really where the virus ones versus the mRNA are so different. Now, it's kind of an interesting story when you look at how desperate the rest of the world is. For example, there's the Sinopharm Chinese COVID vaccine, and you can get one notice after another that one country after another is approving it, but they don't have any public data available. That is a weird thing. There's nothing published in a journal. They have something which is published in the Lancet out of their phase 1 and 2, where they had about 600 patients in the entire trial, in the dose ranging trial, and that was published in October, but there's nothing about a phase 3 efficacy in anywhere. The world is so desperate. You can see one after another: Brazil, Peru, South America, Africa, South Africa. They're all starting to get the Chinese or the AstraZeneca one to be approved here, because they're so desperate. There are rumors out there what the efficacy is. Some claim 86%, some say above 50, but I don't think I would ever see the day where things like this get approved from relatively modern G7 countries or rich countries. They just don't have access to anything else. And the world market is tightening up, and they're all trying to get the Pfizer and now the Moderna vaccine. I mention a lot of that because this is some Erie County data, and I just want to emphasize one thing here. If you're looking at the total death, the mortality data, and this is the entire mortality since the start of COVID in Erie County, you look at the age group over 60 over here, and you go over there and you realize that 95% of your death are people over 60. Those are the ones we have to get vaccinated, specifically the 80-plus-year-olds. And we have to really ramp this up and get them out, because then the hospitals are really not clogged anymore. Then the ICUs are not full anymore. Everybody will be at ease when we take care of 80% of the really sick people. And this is where right now the relatively slow rollout has to do is that they're really trying to be perfect about making sure that everybody is supposed to get it and nobody else gets it. Instead of saying, heck, we do a parallel rollout, we have a lot of the vaccine, about 60% or 70% of the doses sitting in the freezer they're keeping for the second shot. We got to come up with different strategies here and start to get it out into the arm of the elderly specifically. That would put the entire country at a whole different ease here. I like Cinderella stories, so I thought, geez, let's follow up on that one. They're already pretty much, people of the year for the Financial Times and other magazines and other. I mean, how they came up with this and did it literally within hours to finalize a vaccine, which hits an absolute home run, is an amazing Cinderella story. There's no question in my mind that this is, if not that, what else would ever qualify for the Nobel Prize? The technology is really revolutionary, and keep in mind what the technology will do, this kind of a vaccine will do down the road. We're really going to find one protein which is specific for a tumor cell, and we're going to give that information to our immune system, and then our immune system is curing the tumor and the cancer. We are not even years away from that. They already have that platform technology and have already very personalized tumor therapy out there, also coming from those two here. And for me, it's no question in my mind that they had pretty much the biggest contribution in medicine in the last, 100 years, although I'm not 100 years old yet. But as long as I kind of follow medicine to a certain way in the history of medicine, for me, this whole thing is the biggest health crisis. But then also this is the biggest contribution that they were able to came up and hit such a home run where, nothing else even compares to it. Anyway, last slide, open for questions.
Hi, I'm Jens Cyrus.
Yes.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions.
Iris, I think she looks a little bit like you, don't she?
She does. She does. She is so good looking. She is so good looking.
Yes, absolutely.
I wish
the hair, the glasses.
I wish I was just as smart as her. I wish I could say I was as smart as her. Okay, so we looked at 30. You showed data for 30,000 patients. We have millions of people now who have had the shot and have had the second shot. Do we have any more data to substantiate that 95% of people are protected? That's my first question. Second, there are a lot of people who had coronavirus who are in harm's way. You showed some data that they don't mount as high an immune response. When should they get, I know that they're telling them to wait 90 days, but some people have gotten access to the vaccine sooner. Is it okay for them to get the vaccine? And it looks like they would benefit from the vaccine as well.
Yeah.
Third, do we have any information on how long it's going to work? Like, are they looking now at those 30,000 people and seeing if there's any fall off in response? And how about how fast the virus?
Let me start with those three questions first, then we come back to 4, because
okay.
my memory, you know, is
30K.
is strangled here.
So,
So,
the first question.
so the first question was, let me start with number 2 and number 3, and then come back to the first one.
Okay.
So all great questions. Keep in mind, no, we don't have any data on how long the protection with the vaccine works, because we just finished a phase 3 trial, and this is all granted under emergency approval. This is not the full FDA approval, where normally the FDA is asking exactly those kind of questions. But we don't have the luxury to ask them, because they're not in the moment of crisis, they're not relevant. The approval is done here, and it's very rare that the FDA, there's always fast track, but they usually do a full approval then. This is really an emergency approval only. We don't have any data, but it's not important either. It doesn't matter how long the protection works, because we might need a booster in a year, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, maybe never. But that's not an important question right now. In a moment of crisis, we just want to make sure we have protection, and then we can figure out and make more vaccines down the road. They're all counting on you know, that you need a booster here and there down the road, but that's not the important question right now. It will be one, but we have the luxury of time to answer that. When it comes to people who had COVID, yes, the current guideline says you are protected for 90 days. However, they don't see a significant population showing up who have reoccurrent COVID. So they're extending this guideline. It's going very soon, going up to 180 days, and then very likely will come up and say, you be protected for, you're out there for at least a year, 360 days. So they will extend that, because they're trying to save on the vaccine. They tell you not to get vaccinated if you had COVID, because you have a relatively good protection. So we don't know if this 10 times the immunity on the cellular and neuronal level actually is clinically relevant, or if you are as well protected just by having had COVID yet. As I said, it's a combination of T cells and antibodies. And even if you don't have high titers, and some people maybe not even develop antibodies, but they have some kind of a protection there. All of that we can't answer. We're just dealing with the disease for the last 9 months or 10 months, where we can actually study it or get anything. And vaccine data is literally only 2 or 3 weeks old, or a little bit older. That's really our trouble.
Okay, so there's a growing number of patients that I have who are on immune modulators, and they're eligible for vaccine. Yeah. And so there's questions about whether it's as effective in this group of patients, and timing based on the type of immune modulator they're on. Because some people are on weekly injections, some people are on 6 to 8 week infusions. I mean, there's a lot of variety of these immune modulators.
Let's put it this way. It does not affect any interaction with a steroid. The immune response you get here is not a Th2, it's a Th1 immune response on the T cell level. And so, if you're taking a steroid, it really does not interact with that. It's a different pathway of immunity here.
And that's true for like Remicade and Humira and...
Well, and those therapeutic antibodies, they're extremely specific. Keep in mind, they only bind to one receptor and inhibit that receptor very specifically. And now you mentioned Humira because that is a Th1 quote unquote mediated disease. I believe it's tumor necrosis factor alpha, pretty much where they measured an increase in T cells here, which have that receptor. Right now, there is nothing out there which should caution you, because the disease is so specific here and the receptor really is very different from the spike protein, which Humira is inhibiting. There's no warning, no consideration, no concern anywhere out there in the literature.
No, but will
about
you get
these
this,
therapeutic
will-
antibodies?
but will you get but will you get a response? That's my question. You know, the same response.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I have to look back, to be honest. I don't think I heard anything about that, or I read anything in the exclusion that those patients were excluded from the trial. They actually mixed in a lot of people who were at risk, who had certain pre-existing conditions, etc., just to make sure that the vaccine data is very representative of the US population.
Yeah.
But I have not heard or seen any kind of interaction. Also, if you had COVID, can you have a vaccine? Absolutely, you can have it. It's not considered in any way, shape, or form dangerous, or you having already some kind of immunity. Then the vaccine will act like a booster shot. And they had patients, they excluded them when they had COVID already, but they had patients also in the vaccinated group who then who had COVID, and they didn't catch them with antibodies anymore, so they vaccinated them again without, not many, obviously, only 9 in the no, how's it called, in the vaccinated group, and significantly more in the placebo. They didn't get the shots yet. But what I'm trying to say is they had some examples, and they clearly state in their recommendations, it does not prevent you from having a second shot, nor is it in any way endangering you. The only recommendation they have is to say, please don't do it because we want to save the vaccine. You know, there's anywhere between 8 and 10% of which they estimate the US population has had COVID by now. And that's where they, if you know it, save it for now, get it later.